In the quiet, leafy streets of Des Plaines, Illinois during the mid-1970s, the American dream seemed perfectly preserved in amber. This was a place where neighbors shared lawnmowers and children rode bicycles until the streetlights hummed. At the heart of this idyllic community stood John Wayne Gacy, a man who embodied the spirit of civic duty and success. To the residents of Summerdale Avenue, Gacy was more than just a neighbor. He was a pillar of the community. A portly, gregarious man with a firm handshake, he managed a successful construction firm, PDM Contractors. His political ambitions were equally impressive, serving as a dedicated Democratic precinct captain. And he was the man you called when you needed a favor, a job, or leverage. Gacy's house was a hub of activity, hosting backyard barbecues where the smell of grilled meat masked anything lingering in the air. Yet, there was another side to John Wayne Gacy, one that endeared him even further to the public. To the children in hospitals and at suburban birthday parties, he was known as Pogo the Clown. Clad in a custom-made suit with oversized buttons and a face painted in thick grease paint, Gacy transformed into a figure of pure whimsy. He took pride in his clown persona, meticulously applying the white base and the exaggerated red smile that reached toward his ears. He claimed his goal was simply to bring happiness, spending his weekends performing magic tricks and twisting balloons into animals. This mask of benevolence was his greatest shield, a vibrant, laughing caricature that made the very idea of malice seem impossible. Who could ever suspect a man who spent his free time making children laugh? However, beneath the grease paint and the professional accolades, a jagged darkness began to fray the edges of Gacy's life. Those who worked for him at PDM saw a different version of the man, a volatile, authoritarian figure who demanded absolute loyalty and frequently exploded in rage. He was a master manipulator, capable of shifting from a charming friend to a cold-blooded bully in an instant. There were whispers of strange behavior, but his status in the community kept those whispers from turning into shouts. Everything changed on a frigid evening in December 1978. Robert Piest, a well-liked 15-year-old boy working at a local pharmacy, told his mother he was going to step outside for a moment to speak with a contractor about a job. That contractor was John Wayne Gacy. Robert never returned. His disappearance sent a shockwave through the quiet suburb, and for the first time, the spotlight of suspicion turned directly toward the man in the clown suit. Detectives Joseph Kozenchak and Dave Deseritz were tasked with finding the boy, and their investigation led them straight to Gacy's door. From their first encounter, the detectives sensed something was fundamentally wrong. Gacy didn't act like a concerned citizen. He acted like a man playing a role. He claimed he was the victim of a police vendetta, using his political connections to protest his innocence. Yet, the more he talked, the more the detectives felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Illinois winter. During a visit to Gacy's home, an inescapable detail caught their attention. A thick, cloying odor that seemed to rise from the very foundations. It was a smell of decay, a nauseating sweetness that Gacy dismissed as a simple plumbing issue. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. But for Kozenchak and Deseritz, that smell was the first crack in the facade. As the investigation intensified, Gacy's behavior became increasingly erratic and threatening. He began following the detectives, engaging in a dangerous game of cat and mouse. With the evidence mounting and his arrogance growing, the police finally secured a search warrant. They were about to step into a dark nightmare that would eventually rewrite the entire history of American crime and reveal the true monster hiding behind the face of a helpful neighbor. To understand the man who wore the grease paint, one must look into the broken foundations of his childhood. John's father was an alcoholic tyrant who viewed his son's ailments as unforgivable weaknesses. This abuse forged a man who craved power above all else. He wasn't just a pillar of the community. He was a man living a dangerous double life, fueled by a deep-seated resentment toward the world. This wasn't Gacy's first crime. In Iowa, he had been convicted of sodomy, serving time before returning to Illinois to rebuild his life as a model citizen. The man behind the clown was always a predator, hiding his violence behind a wall of civic duty. The community saw a leader, but the past held the blueprint of a monster. As Kozenjak and Deseritz ramped up pressure, a surreal psychological war unfolded. Gacy, fueled by panic and grandiosity, turned the surveillance into a grotesque game. This game of psychological chicken was his way of maintaining dominance. He led officers on high-speed chases, then pulled over to invite them into a diner for coffee. Sitting across from the men trying to dismantle his life, he mocked their lack of evidence, laughing as he discussed the Robert Piest case. He was a performer until the end, treating the investigation as a stage where he played the misunderstood victim. He claimed the police were harassing a good man, while the clock ticked on his destruction. The atmosphere shifted when the search warrant was executed. While Gacy sat in his living room, investigators prepared to descend into the house. The crawl space was a narrow, damp void beneath the floorboards, accessible only by a small hatch. Detective Kozenjak and his team crawled through the mud, and their flashlights cutting through the oppressive gloom. It did not take long for the horror to materialize. As they dug into the putrid earth, human bones surfaced. The cloying smell that had haunted the house was finally explained. Buried in the sludge were the skeletal remains of young men, stacked in a shallow graveyard. As the remains were unearthed, Gacy's mask shattered. The internal conflict within him erupted in jarring shifts. One moment, he would be sobbing, claiming he was a sick man who needed help. The next, he would revert to cold arrogance, belittling the officers for their slow progress. He was no longer the charming precinct captain. He was a cornered animal, gasping as his secrets were dragged into the light. The deeper the police dug into the frozen earth, the more bodies they found. Each one a testament to his cold-blooded efficiency and complete lack of human empathy. News of the discovery ripped through Des Plaines. Neighbors who had shared beers with Gacy during summer barbecues stood on their lawns, staring in disbelief at the police tape. The realization was sickening. While they had been sleeping peacefully, a mass murderer had been building a cemetery beneath his feet. The betrayal was personal. He had used their trust as a cloak for his depravity. The nice guy next door had spent years disposing of human lives just yards from their dinner tables. Under the weight of evidence, Gacy finally broke. He detailed his methodology, specifically the handcuff trick he used to lure his victims. He would show the young men handcuffs, claiming he could show them how to escape. Once the metal ratcheted shut, the trap was closed. They were helpless, and Gacy's playful demeanor would vanish, replaced by a predatory darkness. He spoke of the murders with a terrifying lack of remorse, as if he were discussing a project from his construction company. As the sun set over the excavation site, the true scale of the horror emerged. What started as the search for one missing boy had uncovered a mountain of bodies. The police realized they had stumbled upon one of the most prolific serial killers in history, and the rising body count was soon to become a sprawling, horrific, and terrifying national nightmare. The excavation of the Gacy residence transformed the street into a site of industrial-scale horror. It was no longer a crime scene, it was a mass grave. Teams of investigators, wearing respirators to combat the suffocating stench of decomposition, labored in the claustrophobic darkness of the crawlspace. They worked with hand tools, meticulously sifting through the lime-soaked mud to retrieve the remains of 29 young men. The work was grueling and deeply psychologically scarring. Above ground, the world watched as body bag after body bag was carried through the garage. But the crawlspace did not hold all of Gacy's secrets. 4 additional victims, including 15-year-old Robert Piest, were recovered from the Des Plaines River, where Gacy had discarded them after his basement graveyard reached capacity. The logistical nightmare of identifying these boys began, a process involving dental records and X-rays to piece together identities that had been violently erased. For families of missing, the excavation brought a devastating conclusion to years of uncertainty. These were parents who had kept porch lights on for sons who never returned, families who had spent holidays staring at empty chairs. Now, the hope that their children had simply run away was replaced by the cold reality of a death certificate. The emotional wreckage was devastating and total. Each identification was fresh wound, a confirmation that their loved ones had met their end in the most terrifying way imaginable, at the hands of a man the city had once respected. The legal battle was a spectacle of depravity. Beginning in 1980, the courtroom became a stage for a desperate psychological war. Gacy's defense team attempted to save him from the death penalty by pleading insanity, arguing he was driven by uncontrollable impulses. The expert witnesses engaged in fierce debates, dissecting Gacy's psyche to determine if he was a helpless madman or a calculated monster. Gacy himself sat in the courtroom with a detached expression, occasionally whispering to his lawyers as if he were a participant rather than the defendant. The prosecution, however, painted a different picture, a man who planned his crimes with precision and used his status to trap the vulnerable. The jury needed little time to see through mask. John Wayne Gacy was found guilty on 33 counts of murder. When the death sentence was read, there was no sign of remorse, no tears for the lives he had stolen. His arrogance remained. In his final statements, he maintained a defiant and mocking tone, famously offering a vulgar insult to his executioners. It was a final act of narcissism from a man who refused to acknowledge the humanity of those he had killed. Gacy spent 14 years on death row, but he did not fade into the shadows. He leaned into his dark persona. From his cell, he produced paintings, many of them depicting his Pogo the Clown alter ego. These grotesque images, featuring a smiling clown with sharp makeup, were sold to collectors, further cementing the terrifying pop culture trope of the evil clown. Even in prison, Gacy found a way to manipulate the public's fascination with his crimes, ensuring his name remained synonymous with suburban horror. Justice finally arrived on May 10, 1994. As a crowd gathered outside the Stateville Correctional Center, Gacy was executed by lethal injection. His death provided closure, though the scars on the community remained permanent. And the house on Summerdale Avenue was demolished, but the ground beneath it would always be remembered for the secrets it once held. The story of the killer clown serves as a haunting reminder of the duality of man. It warns us that the most dangerous monsters do not always hide in the dark. Sometimes they wear a suit, attend town hall meetings, and perform at children's parties. Gacy's legacy is a shattered trust in the familiar. The lingering shadow of his crimes persists, teaching a dark lesson that evil often wears the friendliest face and lives right next door.